Thank you again for joining me on another episode of Papa Genius on Urban Politics. We're trending topics with faith and opinion. Today, I am going to be talking about a current event that's happening, and it's in regards to affirmative action and some of the repercussions that are now coming in from studies and a new lawsuit that's being projected towards some of these top Ivy League colleges by a lot of the East Asian community, like Chinese, Japanese, Korean, and they feel as if even now that affirmative action has been dismantled, they still feel as if they're still being targeted, even though they feel like they are a quality student that should be selected by admission boards. Very interesting topic. Let's listen to this really quick, and you'll find out why I call this video Black American Woman, Affirmative Action, Why I'm Happy It All Ended.
The story continues. We are on episode 2. So now the same group that sued the Supreme Court to end affirmative action is now crying crocodile tears that the number of Asian students declined at Yale, Princeton, and Duke. Now they're saying that colleges can't truly be neutral because of the decline in Asian students. I gotta get right off the bat is they're making a mockery and a caricature of Asian Americans, because Asian Americans who've been here for quite some time and know American history know that this was exactly going to happen.
We've always had the brain power as Black American people who have lineage here in the United States. The only thing we've always asked for was equal, balanced, and fair level ground, right? So affirmative action after civil rights had been passed, that's what the initiative was for. Because civil rights had passed and there were still remnants of old Jim Crow, redlining, systemic issues that Black Americans have been facing, and we still continue to face, affirmative action was there, especially in areas of college admissions, job hiring, and other everyday challenges we may come across to earn a decent living. Now, we've never ran away from education. We are always the ones who were proactive about our education, especially after the emancipation of slavery. With little to nothing, Black Americans were able to establish historical Black colleges and universities, and sometimes partnered with white, liberal, wealthy tycoons, say for instance like Spelman, say for instance like Bethune-Cookman College. But we've always taken an initiative to know that without an education here in the United States, it becomes nearly impossible to be able to provide yourself. Plus, there were always barriers that were created to keep us from being able to get over to the other side. Even when we've earned said degree, even when we put in the time, we've always grown up with the notion that we have to be twice as good to get half as much. Again, affirmative action, it wasn't like some type of goodwill gesture from white Americans. No, it was something that needed to be done, because to be able to see civil rights progress, it had to have an initiative to aid it in regards to people of color, because some people did not acknowledge civil rights, and they were still trying to keep qualified Black Americans that should have been enrolled in some of these schools or hired for jobs. It was more so for jobs. But let me tell you, my generation, I don't know anyone personally who has been affected by affirmative action. And I come from a family, myself and my 3 siblings, we all have bachelor's degrees or higher, and all of us had to go to school, and we never had like affirmative action or DEI to help us. So this is something that kind of phased out for Black Americans, and it benefited other groups of people, white women, LGBTQ, and disability. So again, not a goodwill gesture. So, a couple of years ago, the Asian American community called to investigate Harvard's discriminatory admission practices. In their opinion, they felt as if Black people with the initiative of affirmative action was given preferential treatment over them. And that is why Black people were being admitted to Harvard, Yale, Brown, Stanford, a lot of these top Ivy League schools, and that they felt that they were being overseen, overlooked, and that they had the grades and they had the earlier credentials like being valedictorian, salutatorian, and high SAT scores, not considering the fact that Black Americans have to work twice as hard again to get half as much. And a lot of times, because we descend from a group of people that worked for free for almost 300 years, and then another additional 150 years added on to that, we were kept out of the economic race, wasn't given equal education, none of everything that a lot of people that came over here before civil rights passed, we did not enjoy that. Even when our men and women came back from overseas for fighting wars against other countries to protect the American flag. Even with the Revolutionary War, you had some Black people that fought against the British. They were not given any accolades or any rewards for that. But in these people's mind, this particular group, they felt as if they were being overseen. Now here comes Edward Blum. Edward Blum, he is somewhat similar to like the think tank of Heritage Foundation that created the Project 2025. Well, he was like the catalyst that started all of that. And what he did was he'd been trying to get rid of affirmative actions or any other type of minority initiative for years. Why? Because he was being used as a tool by the white male power structure. And we'll talk about that later on. He gets backlash for it, but he doesn't care. This continues on the legacy of being a white male centered country. So now affirmative action has ended. And I say rightfully so. The common cause, the Supreme Court just gutted the Voting Rights Act. Here's what it means for you. And it did change a lot of things. But again, a lot of Black Americans that are descendants of Black American slavery through the transatlantic slave trade that came here to America, we did not really benefit from that. And what is so crazy and ironic is the one Black American that did benefit from affirmative action is Clarence Thomas. That's also a Supreme Court justice who voted to remove affirmative action. Now, of course, I have something in my heart in regards to that on why he wouldn't be true to what that ladder that helped him to get over. It's like he used the ladder, and then when he got over, he kicked the ladder over and then buried it with him ruling against affirmative action. But however, Black people didn't run into the streets and started rallying and marching. You know why? Because it was very unfamiliar for us. Today's Supreme Court ruling decided 6-3 effectively dismantled a key protection of the Voting Rights Act that guaranteed communities of color the right to a fair congressional districts. See, this also was a catalyst for the Voting Rights Act that just took place to where now gerrymandering is basically legal. They were able to, a lot of the conservative groups were able to go into their districts and redraw lines so that with this upcoming election in 2026, they'll be able to maintain their seats or gain even more. He kept his word on his 2.0 administration. He came back and he came harder. When they asked to get rid of affirmative action, that was done. When he signed executive orders to remove any type of DEI mandates. So diversity, equity, and inclusion is like the little buddy to affirmative action. Again, studies have shown, however, that Black Americans did not benefit from DEI in comparison to white females, gay white men, and people who have disabilities. Studies reveal post affirmative action. Let's talk about that. So Edward Blum, he is like the representative for the white male power structure. When he went into Supreme Court to dismantle affirmative action, that was personal. That was to remind Black Americans, not Asians, that was to remind Black Americans that you still get nothing, even though your ancestors worked for free for this country. And we are still pissed off about it, that you got to go free. So, end of benefits for white men. See, all of this actually will come back and bite you in the butt. What you set off to do, if you dig a grave for me, make sure you dig too, because the other one's gonna be for you. Since the Supreme Court banned race as a consideration for college admissions, enrollment among college freshmen who self-reported as white dropped to 31% in 2025 from 40% in 2023. That is a considerable percentage drop in college enrollment for white men. See, it was never about Asians. They used this Asian community as the buffer between Edward Blum and the men that he represented and the Black American community. The surprise in the data, white men see the steepest enrollment fall after DEI changes. This drips with irony. Someone never wrote about education with white men here in this country. White men don't need education. They have their own network. They are the power structure. So when Black Americans fought for hundreds of years for freedom and civil rights, it wasn't for us primarily, it was for everybody, because we understood very early on that we need to invent the wheel of freedom and liberties, because it's not going to be handed to you here in America. You have to take it, and if you don't protect it, it's going to be like a domino effect. Once you take your foot off of it, once you let that one domino go here in America when it comes to civil rights, voting rights, things like that, you might as well fold up, because everything else that supports that, it's going to also fall behind it. So white men, they are in the University of the Second Amendment, and that's always been. White men have a fascination with militia, guns. I'm not saying Black men don't have a liking to that. However, their interest in guns, it comes from a more deeper rooted historical background that helped to start this country called America, a nation that had already existed, but for them to start their own country here on these grounds. That's why you have so many white men that join a lot of these race militias, a lot of these hate groups. They get enticed by it. They see all of these men walking around with these firearms, wearing tactical gear. That's excitement for them, even though they're not going out to fight an enemy nation. No, they're not going to want to sign up to do that. They just use these guns because they have been given the mandate to do that over 100 years ago. Let's talk about that. So, article with the Griot says, why are gun shows so white? And other thoughts after attending a gun show. It was an opinion article. After attending an event sponsored by one of the country's largest gun shows, he gave his experience. And so the affirmative action ending with the buffer of Edward Blum using the Asian American Coalition and that study that they had in regards to low acceptance admissions into Harvard for their community was a challenge for them because they said that it was black people in affirmative action. A lot of what they do and a lot of what white American men do who fall into these militia groups, people like Edward Blum, people like the president of the Heritage Foundation that went to college and got a PhD in African American studies, that's diabolical. It's all rooted in anti-blackness. And so instead of creating coalitions and true authentic coalitions with black American people, what has happened is a lot of people in this Asian community have fallen under the assumption that just because they are not black, they are white. Even if they are not considered all the way white, just a little bit is enough to suffice for them. And to me, I feel like it's crazy. Let's go back and I'm going to tell you about how all of this kind of ties into the ending of slavery. The whip. The whip was the choice of weapon. It was a tool that was used to reprogram black American people into fear and submission of the white man. And it wasn't of the rich white man because, see, plantations hired overseers. Wealthy plantation landowners, they didn't do the dirty work. They hired lower class white men to do the bad deeds, to keep slaves under submission, to reduce runaways, and to motivate rapid, more aggressive type of push for production. So you don't pick 200 bales of cotton today, I'm going to whip you until I see white meat. That's terrifying. If you don't pull 150 bales of cotton today, I'm going to beat your child. That's psychological warfare, and it was done under the vice of a whip. So after slavery ended, white men were provided a mandate in the South that they were given 2 firearms. And this is real. Here it goes right here. Most of them were given 2 firearms during Reconstruction because they put the fear in them that all of these newly freed slaves were going to somehow come back and take out their hostility on white men and your wives and your children. So it's best to load up on firearms so that you can keep these newly freed Negroes under your subjection. They progressed up from the gun that they once used on Native Americans. But see, you don't want to kill your labor force. So they decided to use the whip instead. The whip was also very humiliating, especially when it comes to men. They would whip slaves not in like a private setting. No, they would make all of the slaves come out along with the children. They will oftentimes strip the man or the woman, and then they would either stretch you out on the ground or they would hang you from some type of contraption, and they would do a long laborious whipping on the slave. That was to ingrain into the slave that if you disobey, this whip is going to speak for me. But even after slavery ended, they still terrorized, and they created a new militia called the Ku Klux. Okay, KKK is what you probably hear of today. but they called them the Klux back then. And they were a group of terrorists, domestic terrorists. They went out, and anything that black people tried to build, they would burn it down. If they tried to build a church, they would burn it down. They were tried to build a schoolhouse, they would burn it down. They would burn down people's homes. They were lynching people. They went back to an even more aggressive punishment for newly freed slaves, and all the way up until 1964, where lynching became the new terroristic threat. I bring all of this up to say is because, and all of this is going to tie together, I want to talk about Chinese Americans, Japanese Americans, and also Korean Americans. So see, there's a major difference when it comes to Chinese, Japanese, Korean. I'm talking about this group in particular. They have short-term memory, because even though they didn't go through slavery, and they were able to come here to the United States through the Pacific to California, and they migrated even up further north and a little bit more out west. A lot of those were the railroad workers. They'd work in mines using dynamite. A lot of them lost their lives. A lot of them became very disabled, losing limbs, losing vision, because white people hired them at very, 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 very cheap rates for them to go and help them build the West. That's when the West was expanding after slavery. And the way that they treated these people, you can even see it in a lot of Hollywood movies, even all the way up to like the 70s. They made a lot of Asian Americans as characters. So some people say, well, blackface was a character, and yes it was, and yes it was. However, with that, there was a slow resistance and a rising that came with black Americans in Hollywood. And that is because we did master entertainment. And although a lot of discrimination took place, black Americans still slowly were able to gain recognition and earn more reputable roles that had them being nominated for Oscars. They were able to come out of poverty. They became the voices and the faces for civil rights movement. So it's a very different contrast in regards to Asian Americans in Hollywood, where I get upset myself when I see some of these old movies. And again, even all the way up to like the 70s and 80s, I saw a lot of things that demean the intelligence of the Asian community. But they have short-term memory. And here it goes right here. Chinese railroad workers. About 1,000 feet from this location is the track of the Transcontinental Railroad. In 1865, thousands of Chinese in Guangdong province, China, were recruited to work on these great connection between the East and West Coast. Very interesting. And a lot of them earned very menial amounts of money. A lot of them were not able to ever go back home. And also too, black people have always been the buffer between this particular group of Asians and white people. We have always been the buffer because we were not allowed to establish successful townships that had hospitals and our own schools and hotels and pharmacies and all the things that we were building. All of the towns and the communities that we built up, they were bombed at, they were flooded, they were burned down. So what happened is these Asian communities were able to come into the black community with the permission of white men and said, you can't open your store up in our side of town. No, that's for the white people. But you can open up a store over there on the Negro side of town. And here we are today in 2026, where a majority of stores, businesses that are successful in the United States are rooted right in the black neighborhoods and communities. Generational wealth. They pass these stores, they pass these places of business. I'm not hating on it. However, it's like, it's not that black people don't want to do anything. It's such a hard upheaval because a lot of these groups, like the Heritage Foundation, like Edward Blum, for a black man and a woman to succeed, that is their greatest threat. It is not the indigenous Indian. It's not the Asian American. It is the black American. Because they created a pact with their own grandfathers, great grandfathers that lost the war. That grandpa, the South will come back again. And they mean that. Which is why there were special voting laws in place over southern states for many, many years, until just a couple of years ago when they removed that. The other thing that happened with Asian American is that was prison camp that was in California during the World War II. They were prisoner of war camps. They had women, men, and children of Japanese descent. It was awful. There's movies out there about it. There's a lot of RAPE, a lot of MURDERS. A lot of atrocities happen there. And you can see right here, this is one of the postings they were telling people when World War II started. You need to, if you lived here in America, and this was in California, if you lived here in America, then you need to report as a Japanese American. And it really didn't matter. Just if you looked Asian, you were supposed to report to this camp because you were considered an enemy of the state. It says, instruction to all persons of Japanese ancestry living in the following areas. And they meant business too. And these are some of the prison camps. See, Asian Americans, they have very short-term memory when it comes to all of the hatred that has taken place against them. But I'm not finished. Then let's talk about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Nuclear weapons were used on these two cities that completely annihilated them. Yes, they were in war with us. Yes, the war was tragic. However, it was a crime against humanity for them to use a nuclear weapon. And it completely wiped out. I'm talking about, there were generations of people, and still to this day, that are still living, that have suffered from repercussions of the chemicals that occurred. Even if they survived, you would have like black rain that came down for days, and that's the chemicals from the after effects of the hydrogen bomb going off. And a lot of those people died from just the black rain coming down. Very horrific. There's a famous photo of a young Japanese boy. He had to be maybe about 9 or 10 years old, and on his back he was carrying his deceased baby brother. He was carrying him because he was trying to take care of him. He was trying to get to help, and he didn't realize that he was walking around with a corpse on his back. I mean, those are just some of the things that it's like, wow, you have selective memory. Then we'll talk about the Vietnam War, right? Even that, a lot of Vietnamese Americans have established businesses here in the United States, have allowed America to come over to their country and establish business after the Vietnam War. But let's be honest, a lot of American lives were lost over there. A lot of American still have vitriol towards Lyndon B. Johnson, and they still have vitriol towards a lot of Asian Americans. We're going to get to that. Then the most recent events that occurred. The first one I'm talking about is the Hyundai plant in Georgia, and how ICE raided the Hyundai plant and put 300 Korean workers that were legally there under contract with the state of Georgia to develop a new and construct a new Hyundai plant, because the software and the engineering to help develop that plant it is such a massive taking, and America does not have enough American qualified engineers, technicians to be able to do that job. So they were sent here by the company that was going to bring a multi-billion-dollar job projection for American citizens here in Georgia. That got flopped when a white woman who was running for office decided that, it says here, on September 4th, ICE raided the Hyundai battery plant, detaining 475 immigrants after a woman tipped off ICE over possible trafficking and unsafe labor concerns. Since then, people have condemned it as a massive overreach that punished workers instead of protecting them. It was a white woman who, even herself, she's Republican, believes in guns, firearms, because she's from that brand. She grew up in that white male power structure, and they all go to the University of the Second Amendment. It's nothing different. It's all ties in together. And we have not had an agreement for Korea to come back since. That means that multi-billion-dollar jobs are like gone in the wind, because a white woman called in and didn't check her sources and lied, and it caused a catastrophe. Trump has been to Asia now twice in less than a year. Brian Kemp, the governor of the state of Georgia, has been over there to South Korea, begging the South Korean president that they come back, because it is economic catastrophic event for Hyundai now to possibly relocate. They could relocate their plant in India. They could take their plant to Africa. They could take their plant to South America or Mexico. They have options. Or Canada. Either one. They have so many options. And America is a dying empire. And they are still insulted by what happened. Now, let's talk about coronavirus pandemic. Okay? Anti-Asian, according to the National Health Institute, this study, it says anti-Asian racism in COVID-19, how it started, how it is going, and what we can do. As the coronavirus disease of 2019 swept across the United States in 2021, another concern rose to the forefront of conversations: racism against Asian Americans. Indeed, the sudden and precipitous rise in anti-Asian bias and discrimination can be conceptualized as a second public health crisis. Now, I don't know about you, but I interact with, and I'm thrown back, because they'll say, well, is it made in America? I don't want it if it's made in China. See, they're not insulting China because China is our major competitor. No. They're insulting Asian culture here in America. That's a dog whistle. That's a dog whistle. And so I have to turn the conversation because it's very uncomfortable, and I do not go for discrimination. What really catapulted this was Donald Trump. So during his first administration, when the COVID virus started to begin, and they didn't really have a whole lot of information and data on how it began, but they were told that it was started by some wild game in a Chinese food market in the city of Wuhan, China. Now, instead of getting all of the information, because again, these are dog whistles. It's not like these people are like a lot of people who are MAGA Republican. They don't. I'm not Republican. I'm not Democrat. But the sentiment and the policy changes tell me that you're not for people of color. You're not for minorities. You're not for women either. But you're also not for these type of Asian Americans. And so President Trump went onto his social media and started this. The United States will be powerfully supporting those industries, like airlines and others that are particularly affected by the Chinese virus. We will be stronger than ever before. You see, that's a dog whistle. If you don't know what a dog whistle means, that means it's like it's an innuendo. It's speaking between the lines. You know, you're trying to be smart. Like a lot of people talk about black people in a negative way. They have a group of people that continue to perpetuate that lie. They won't talk about the things in regards to their community, but they love to discriminate against other communities. Not all white people, okay? But I'm talking about this particular group. And so since then, it has been an uphill battle for Asians in this particular group, to fight against that stereotype. See, my ethnicity is not a virus. They dealt with a lot of physical violence during this time. They were treated just like they were treated when World War II happened and Japanese Americans were being discriminated against. This is like rinse, cycle, and repeat here in America. These Asian Americans are what we consider academically, and they themselves have also accepted that term, and that is the model minority myth. Now, what is the model minority myth? That means that I come here to America, I do my work, I get successful, I keep my head low, I make no noise, even though prejudices, bigotries, systemic issues also affect me. My political movement in this country is void. I do not have a voice for my people if something affects me medically, environmental wise, policy wise. There's really no real representation for this group. And you can even see that in Congress and Senate. We've never really had a very heavy populated Senate or Republican House with Asians from like Korea, South Korea, from Japan, from China, Vietnam, Cambodia. You see what I'm saying? We have never had that type of representation. I'll tell you this is going to tie up everything. America is a militia formulated from citizenship based on white survival and escape from their former European lords. Now I say that. That's my thing. Stacey Jenkins, MBA. That's what I believe. Okay? I believe that this country was radicalized by survival and escapism from the old lordship, where they in their former countries in Europe were the serfs. They were the servants. They were the scullery maids. They were the chimney sweepers. And the narrative is, oh no, we fled from England and Ireland and all of these European, Poland, all of these European countries because, and some from Spain, because we were escaping religious persecution. No. The Dutch helped to transport a lot of European citizens into the United States. Okay? And what happened was, along with them transporting these newcomers to the United States, to the Americas, they also got into transporting Africans to be used as slaves throughout the Americas and Europe as well. When the slaves were brought here to America, there were also still free people that were working. But the conditions and the policies started to be changed very rapidly, and Black Americans started to lose their autonomy and their freedom because white people that came into America back then wanted to get out of their indentured servitude contracts. The best way for them to do that is create a line that distincts black and white differences. And they needed to help build up these new colonies. They could not afford to send for all of their people to come here. So the best thing that they did was partner up with the Dutch. Got free labor by shipping in black people that would later on become black Americans from Africa. And the first ship that came here was in 1619, I think, the White Lion, of newly captured Africans brought to the Americas. And so from there, it has been survival mode, because they've even found skulls to where those Mayflower descendants that came from Britain had reverted into cannibalism. They found skulls where there were actual human teeth marks in there, because they could not survive this new world until the natives helped them, the native indigenous people helped them, and they were able to get free labor by using black people. After that ride finally came to an end in 1863 to 1865, they became angry. I've gotten used to it. This is how it's always been. This is the way of life. This is how America was built. And forget about the hardships that a group of people who have freely labored and built up this country to make it attractive for other foreigners to come into it. Forget about them. And so, is all that matters. And those that are in power will help to uphold that Second Amendment. Even if we have to dismantle every initiative that helps people, white masculinity becomes a gravitational force that molded the complexity of American jurisprudence towards its normative goal, the preservation of white men's property. And that clearly sums up everything what I said. And all of this drove these Asian Americans to go to the Supreme Court justice, being used as a buffer, as a tool for white men to keep their superiority. That's always what it's been about. And in fact, after the emancipation of slavery is where the formulation of the American police system started. Because I've given you militia now. The government gives you militia. Even though the government didn't give any type of recompense to the newly freed slaves, but they rewarded the landowners in the South during the Reconstruction era with militia to protect themselves. Why did American policing get so big so fast? The invention of the police by the New Yorker, written by Jill Lepore. Why did American policing get so big so fast? The answer mainly is slavery. Again, there goes the whip. You see him holding the black person's child, terror with the whip. Until after slavery, that's when the gun came. And that's why a lot of these men are not interested in this whole affirmative action thing on getting into college. Asian Americans were really trying to get into college. However, Edward Blum used that motivation for Asians wanting to get into college so bad. He used that weakness with the Asian community to empower his ability to go to the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, and strike down affirmative action, because I don't want to work with black people, and I want to have the power to say I do not have to hire you. And a lot of that trickles down into discrimination against other minority communities, the Hispanic community, race militias. These are descendants of their forefathers. The patriots, those that fought against the British crown. Even to this day, Britain considers America's traitors to the crown, to their king. This is why Chud the Builder has become emboldened. A lot of this, Dual pays his $1 million bond to bail him out. A scenario that he created out of anti-blackness. Why? Because he's being compensated to create he's being compensated to create rage bait. He's motivated to and being compensated because the shadows behind him that's making sure that he's being paid, they're wanting to start a race war. And they had bet on Chud the Builder and his social media presence and his lack of respect for anybody that's not white and male and American and a nationalist. This emboldens them. White Texas man arrested for impersonating ICE agent and unlawfully detaining black motorists. You see what I'm saying? You see what I'm saying? Medium, inheritance, how the transatlantic slave trade followed us into the 21st century. The story of the African American is not only the quintessential American story, but it's really the story that continues to shape who we are today. And when you mean what he means by who we are, who America is today. A people that was stolen from their land, having to recreate from nothing. And this goes to my final point in the name of this video on why I'm so happy it all ended. Why? Because while we have been studied and have been boxed into academia that still follows us to this day, that we were not smart enough in comparison to the European or any other race. Diversity initiatives are over shifting black Americans to energize. When most never experienced the effects of something we never benefited from in the masses. See, this is now a new push in this Trump 2.0 administration. The removal of the affirmative action, the dismantling of DEI, all of these things that they're trying to strip away. The Voting Right Act, knock down one domino, and you think you're reinventing the wheel by saying, oh, well, we'll get rid of affirmative action, and then they'll see my worth. That's what these Asian people are saying. Then they'll see my worth. They will never see your worth. Ever. You're not white, you're not male, and you're not from America. And that is why black Americans have fought so hard and so long with so little, so that you are protected, not just us. Why I say I'm glad it ended, because some of the best inventions occurred from newly freed slaves or children of slaves or descendants of slaves in the early 20th century. The list can go on and on and on. Carbon filament, created by Lewis Latimer, the iridescent light bulb. Home security systems, all of these things we still use today in 2026 in an AI world, right? Home security systems, co-invented by Marie Van Britten Brown, black woman. Electrical resistor system for pacemakers, computers, and more, invented by black American Otis Boykin. Garrett Morgan was an African American inventor, businessman, and community leader, best known for his groundbreaking inventions, including the modern traffic signals that we use today. And green and yellow traffic light stop. You can thank Garrett Morgan, a black American who created that. Dr. Charles Drew. When you go to a blood bank, a Red Cross, or when you donate plasma and you get a little money for it, you can thank this black man, this black American man. His name is Dr. Charles Drew. He created that system. GPS, you can thank Dr. Gladys West, a child of sharecroppers. Built mathematical foundation for GPS. The world has been navigating by her work ever since. Jesse Eugene Russell is the inventor of the digital cell phone. iPhone, before there was an Apple, there was Black American Jesse Eugene Russell, who also descended from slaves. Sanitary belt, toilet tissue holder, carrying pouch for a walker, invented by Mary Kenner, another Black American woman. Automatic gear shift for beer taps, invented by a Black man. His name was Richard Spikes. You can look all of this up. Sarah Boone was an African American dressmaker who made her name by inventing the modern day ironing board. When you pull that ironing board out because you got somewhere special you got to go to, and you got to iron your shirt, you can thank this Black woman. Her name is Sarah Boone. It's all in the history books. Frederick McKinley Jones, a Black inventor and entrepreneur best known for his development for the portable refrigeration equipment used to transport food, blood, and medicine during World War II. They still use that same method today. That patent is still being used to this day when fast food restaurants have to ship supplies like meat, hamburger buns, all the stuff that they need to prepare food with. When the army has to transport blood and build up blood banks and keep things refrigerated like vaccines and aid, you can thank this Black man. Did you know a Black man invented the ice cream scoop in 1897? He did. What about the color computer monitor, co-invented by Mr. Mark? Ever heard of saying the real McCoy? You say the real McCoy, but do you know who McCoy was? McCoy also descended from slavery. I think he may have even been a former slave. Is the one who created the lubrication for steam engines and new cars, because there were other people who tried to copy off of his patent. However, when they got the machinery, it wasn't working as good as it was supposed to work with that lubrication that Mr. McCoy had made. And so when manufacturing plants and also car manufacturing plants wanted to switch back over to the lubrication that he created, they said, I don't want that other stuff. I want the real McCoy. That's him. Ever heard of Jack Daniels? Little history about that. So who thought a young Jack Daniel how to distill who taught a young Jack Daniel how to distill what would become the world's best-selling whiskey? Nathan Nearest Green, an enslaved Black master distiller, taught distilling techniques to Jack Daniel, founder of the Jack Daniel Tennessee whiskey. And at this moment, one of his Mr. Nearest Green, Nathan Nearest Green, his descendants right now own a portion of a new Jack Daniel, and they were able to get inheritance and compensated back because for over 100 years Jack Daniels had never told anybody about a former slave, Nathan Nearest Green, that taught him everything he needed to know. And that's how Jack Daniels was created. Nearest Green also has his own whiskey now that Jack Daniels created along with his great niece, I think, or great granddaughter. And I think that's phenomenal. See, we've always had our own schools. We've always had historical Black colleges and universities. So that's why when DEI and affirmative action was dismantled, Black people never ran into the streets. We just said, okay, well, we've always had options. My thing is this, and I brought this up in another video in the past, and that is, for all of the history that many of these Asian communities that I mentioned in this video have established in the United States for over 100 years, you would think that they would have their own version of HBCUs, right? That because they do lead in a lot of science and mathematics, technology, So you would think that they would be creating their own highly coveted colleges and universities that everybody else would want to get into. And that's my thing. That's where you find the modern minority. Say nothing, keep your head low, and just exist. And you know, the great thing about HBCUs is this: we welcome everybody. We welcome everybody with open arms. I hope that this young man who's taking out this current lawsuit, along with people in his community, I hope that they now finally learn along the way that anti-blackness does not pay. If anything, it sets you back. It sets the entire country back, because you can't reinvent the wheel of civil rights in America. We've perfected the science for over 400 years. It just can't be redone. Please definitely let me know what you think. Like, share, and subscribe. I appreciate you continuing to listen to the videos, and I do wish that you are having a blessed day and the rest of your week. Thank you.